So hello and welcome to this very special Hearing Week question and answer session. Today we are joined by two experts in the field of accessibility who will be able to shed some light on accessibility and technology, both from a content creator perspective and an end user perspective. So my guests today are Laurie Samuels, who is Accessibility Director at NBC Universal, who leads strategic accessibility programs for NBC enterprises, including NBC Entertainment, NBC Sports, Olympics, cable networks, and digital businesses. And Meryl Evans, who is a digital marketer extraordinaire and celebrated author who has worked with a number of Fortune 500 companies. So welcome Meryl and Laurie for agreeing to take part. Could I get you both to explain your roles in a bit more detail and why accessibility is such a passion for you both? Maybe Laurie, you go first.
Sure, thank you, Lucas. Nice to be here with Meryl. So I actually have, most of my career has been in working in the technology industry. So I have been with NBC Universal for 1 year, and it's the first time I've worked for a media company. So that's exciting and different for me. My interest in accessibility goes back decades. My sister has cerebral palsy. I guess I grew up with that, just understanding that many people with disabilities are excluded and face barriers to access. So I enjoy being part of a solution to that problem.
That's fantastic. And Meryl, maybe you could give a bit more about why you're involved in accessibility and tell us a bit about where you are now.
Well, obviously I was born into it, being born profoundly deaf. And I got my first caption decoder in 1983. And that was the most exciting thing because I could finally watch TV and movies without asking people 1,000 questions. And then in the 90s, there was a caption book that came out that looked at everything that was captioned, because back then captioning wasn't as common as it is now. And then a couple of years ago, I started making videos about captioning, why do it, why is it important that quality matters. And now I speak about it and share my expertise online and in programs.
Amazing. So yeah, maybe expanding on that, a question for you both. What do you see as the state of accessibility for those who experience hard of hearing in technology today? Laurie, if maybe.
Sure. So certainly, as Meryl said, captioning is much more ubiquitous than it used to be. So it's such a common technology and a great solution, and it's great for everyone. There's many use cases for captioning besides just the deaf, hard of hearing, and so I think what we're seeing is that captioning is now completely standard on all broadcast, network television. So in other words, when you see a show on television, that is most likely going to be captioned. Where we still see some room for improvement in captioning is on the digital side, and the prevalence of digital video on social media, for education, other purposes. So we need to see more captioning in the digital video space. But generally, it's pretty good on your prime time kind of programming. So.
And Meryl, I guess with all these new platforms, how has it improved for you, and what do you see as the state of accessibility for yourself?
Ask 10 deaf and hard of hearing people any question, and you'll get 10 different answers. Well, that diverse. But as Laurie was saying, it's great on the TV side. Digital needs work. The frustrating part is you can have the same program on TV and online, and the online captions would be not as good because of the different devices. So everything works differently. It's not identical. So that's a challenge. And the latest barrier we have now is audio-based social networks like Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces. Sure, we can use the transcription tool to automatically caption the conversation. Quite frankly, I wouldn't join, even if they have built-in caption. For me, audio, social networks, and podcasts drain my energy faster than any other communication tool, as there's a lot of reading involved with no visual. And the common issue I'm hearing from others who are deaf and hard of hearing is Zoom meetings and webinars. They're not captioned unless the person hosting does something about it. Zoom has recently changed its settings so that people with very basic accounts can now have automatic caption. But the problem is we're not the host. If you're not the host, you can't turn on the caption. So we still have to rely on other people and other third-party tools.
That's yeah. I guess podcasts are so much more, I guess, prevalent these days, and the fact that there is nothing for the hard of hearing is a real shame. It's kind of a market that's missing out.
Well, and with podcasts, of course, you can provide a transcript and absolutely should do that. So at least that's one way to get the content conveyed. But many people who do podcasts don't provide a transcript. So
yeah. And I guess we live in very abnormal times. I guess, Laurie, from your opinion, and Meryl as well, what impact has the COVID pandemic had on how much more content we're consuming through headphones and through speakers and people's hearing? And I guess, Laurie, are you seeing more of a demand for accessibility options across NBC's properties?
well, I think there's certainly the pandemic has affected everything with regard to entertainment and education, news, content, of course. So I make the point frequently in that accessibility is just essential for the digital accessibility specifically is essential. We can't participate in all of the things that we need to be able to participate in, education, news, health information, entertainment, working, shopping, etc., unless we have accessibility. So it has highlighted that. It does make the quote unquote case easier. People understand how much we're living in the digital space now. So, but I think we still need to see so much more. We still need to do so much better. And I just say the broader we, all companies need to do better in this space.
And Meryl, I know you sent me a message about Bryan Cranston doing lip reading more. How has the pandemic kind of affected you? Are you seeing more technology providers provide accessibility options? You mentioned Zoom in your last answer, or have we still got a lot more to do?
Well, it depends on different things, but the biggest one is the move from face-to-face event to online event, and they both have their highs and lows. For one, a conference that I spoke at switched to virtual. All talks were captioned. The advantage is that I didn't have the stress of wondering if I'm going to be able to lip read the speaker. So that was a big advantage. With caption, I knew I'd catch everything, even though live caption are a bit of a challenge. But then I experienced a severe case of concentration fatigue from attending too many virtual events. Now I have to be selective with my time on virtual events because it was affecting my work. And the other thing is, companies are starting to understand that accessibility is not just for the people who are the target audience. For example, caption, people think deaf and hard of hearing, that's who it's for. Not anymore. 80% of the people using caption are not even deaf or hard of hearing. So you have people who have no disabilities, you have people who have different disabilities using caption. So when you make your content accessible, you're giving people a choice in how they consume the content.
Yes, and I just saw just recently a video about how captions on, if you turn on captions, this helps younger children with their literacy and their reading comprehension quite a bit. I can't remember. It was something like 80% better comprehension, and they kept their literacy skills up, which of course is a huge concern now because of the pandemic. We have children kind of falling behind in school. So captions end up being incredibly helpful for children learning to read.
My mom quoted Sesame Street children's show for helping me learn how to read before I was even in kindergarten. I was the youngest to read in my family. And I think, if you think about it, Sesame Street has a lot of words on their screen, letters and numbers. And so that probably had an impact on my reading.
That's great. And I guess having that additional kind of education for kids is really powerful in the days, well, today, where kids can't go to school around the world. And for Meryl, I know we've touched on it in the last couple of questions, but have you seen a shift in how technology and content providers are approaching the 1 in 7 people globally who are hard of hearing, or kind of starting to develop hearing difficulties, in terms of making their technologies and UX design more inclusive, or does more need to be done?
The biggest shift has to be video calls and conferencing. When everything started shutting down a year ago today, I had few resources to help me during video meetings and webinars. Then Google Meet with built-in caption came along a few months later. The Microsoft team added caption. It's all snowballing. But many of the professional platforms like Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting don't have caption or require adding a third party, which adds to the cost. Many of those who need captions don't work for a large company in which they're part of the network like Microsoft Teams. They're individuals who are attending webinars and events, and they have to figure out how to caption themselves. While Zoom is making the auto caption feature available, as I mentioned earlier, the problem is the person who needs the caption is not always the host.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think we're seeing progress on this, but as Meryl said, it's coming in stages. It's not where we want it to be, just in those video conferencing tools. But I do think we're heading in, and this is why it's so important for the deaf, hard of hearing community to continue to advocate. We're now seeing, ASL interpreter with the press conferences, from the White House. So I think we have progress, but there is always more to do, and we'd like to see this be really just available in every solution that you're working with. So yeah.
What Laurie was just saying, that there was an ASL interpreter with the White House briefing, but there's no caption.
Yeah.
And that means that not every deaf person knows ASL. Right. So you're missing a huge chunk of the audience without the caption.
And how are you finding, I guess, other technologies outside of telecommunication, like smartphones and streaming providers? How do you think they've done and adapted to the hard of hearing community?
Well, generally, there are some great accessibility capabilities in particularly the Apple platforms, but also Android devices as well. There's a lot that is there built in, but companies don't always take advantage or understand those accessibility settings even in, let's say, in mobile applications. So I think one thing I always encourage product teams to do is explore the accessibility settings, play with them, get used to them, see what's in there. Apple adds things all the time, so does Google for Android. So and mobile devices are with us everywhere we go. So I think it's important for developers and product teams to understand that these settings are there for a reason. Everything from what the device can do, it can vibrate, to alert people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So there's a great deal of capability. I think product teams need to be more aware of those capabilities and work with them. So whether it's enlarging text or being sensitive to how we use color, to making sure that our videos are captioned and there's a way to adjust the settings, all of that.
And they need to think about how easy it is to use the product. Here's a great example. I think somebody had linked to a caption video on LinkedIn in a private message. The person clicked on it from his phone and it opened YouTube within LinkedIn, and he thought it wasn't captioned. And I'm like, oh, it is captioned. So I tried it myself, and it took me a good 10 minutes to get the caption to work on my phone. It worked great on my computer, but not my phone. So they need to simplify things.
Yeah, I was going to ask, as an example, I've got some AirPods, and one of the prompts is to have spatial audio. How important do you think it is for technology firms when you're setting up a device to put hearing health or hearing accessibility options right at the front and center during the setup phase?
Yeah, extremely important. Again, I think the most important thing is that product teams work with people with disabilities and also deaf and hard of hearing, so that especially if you're designing something that is related to hearing, then of course you need to be working with people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So I think it's critical. Sometimes that is left out, and it shouldn't be. Even we're seeing new technologies with automated captioning and evaluating that, but it's critical to make sure that we're listening and including people who are deaf, hard of hearing, to make sure that that's being designed in an inclusive way.
And Meryl, do you have any thoughts on what more technology companies could be doing to improve that accessibility for those who are hard of hearing or deaf?
We have a long way to go. Many companies are thinking about accessibility and inclusion, where the definition of inclusion is limited, actually. One international company has an excellent inclusion team in Europe, but that's not the case with North American operations. They had an all-hands meeting on Microsoft Teams. As I mentioned earlier, Teams has the ability to do automatic caption as long as someone turns it on. Well, this all-hands meeting was all audio with PowerPoint. There were no captions. In the all-hands meeting like this for the whole country, it definitely called for live captioners instead of automatic caption, but instead they had 0 caption. LinkedIn recently announced all LinkedIn Live events will be auto caption now. So that's progress. Zoom, as I mentioned before, but still, it doesn't put it in the control of the viewer. So again, we're dependent on others to get accessibility we need.
Okay, and talking to that point, Laurie, could you speak to some of the accessibility initiatives that you are undertaking as your role as Accessibility Director at NBC Universal, and how much does technology play a role in that?
Well, it's all technology. I'll answer the second part first. So technology empowers, all of everything I'm going to describe. So my focus is digital accessibility, which I kind of divide into 2 layers. One is the experience itself of interacting with the product, a website, a mobile app, or an app that's running on your Roku or your Samsung TV, for example. So we have the actual experience. And of course, accessibility is broader than just, deaf, hard of hearing folks. We think about people with vision, visual disabilities, mobility or motor disabilities, cognitive disabilities. All of that is factored into inclusive design. So there's the applications themselves or the products themselves, and then there's this layer of content. So as a media company, we focus, of course, on delivering content, whether it's news or sports or entertainment content. So there's two primary things with content accessibility. One is captioning that we've been talking about today. The second is something called audio description, which is more for people with vision loss. And that is to fill in the gaps and basically try to provide an equivalent experience. If you were blind and watching a movie with your friend, that audio description helps you have an understanding of what's happening when there isn't dialogue in the movie. So I focus, my focus is across all of that, including both the experiences that our customers have, as well as our employees. We want to make sure we can hire more people with disabilities to work at NBC Universal. So we want to make sure we have an accessible tools for our employees, and there's no barriers. I will say that I'm excited about some of the other aspects also that aren't technology, which is the commitment that we have to hire actors with disabilities to be in our shows and our productions. We have just announced that we will be auditioning actors with disabilities for every new production, which is very exciting. And I think disability representation is just such a necessary part of all of this, that people with disabilities need to see themselves represented authentically on screen, small screens and big screens. So that's an area that's exciting. I think the company is wonderful in its commitment to that. We can certainly do more, but very excited to see that disability is very much a pillar of our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. And so that's exciting.
That's really great to hear, and especially the disability casting. That's really exciting. So final question from me. What does the future of hearing accessibility look like in your opinion? What features would you like to see more of in our everyday technologies and the services that you use? Meryl?
The biggest barrier for people who are deaf and hard of hearing is translating audio into readable text or ASL. Captions are, or sign language, or BSL. Captions are a big help here. However, many companies are relying more and more on ASR, which is automatic caption. It's so hard to be accurate with all the different accents and audio quality and other factors. Companies need to start factoring accessibility, especially captioning, into their marketing budget to ensure they're always provided and that they're high quality caption. Live events are the hardest to follow, whether with human or auto caption, as they call them. Humans do a far better job. Any company holding any live event needs to use humans for captioning and include a sign language interpreter. People who prefer language is sign language follow sign language easier than caption during live events. So, considering again, 80% of the people using caption are not even deaf or hard of hearing, so it's definitely worth investing as we carry our media devices with us, and many of us don't have the sound on.
I agree. I think that we will continue to see the evolution of automated speech recognition, or ASR, as Meryl referenced. It's not ready for substituting the live captioning yet. We are, researching this and looking at how we can train those systems to do a better job of accuracy There are differences between the automated generated captions and human generated captions. Not always necessarily bad sometimes, but just difference. So we have to continue to evolve this technology. I do think it will ultimately help get more captioning into the ecosystem, but I completely agree with Meryl that it's so important right now to make sure that if you're planning a live event, if you're planning just a video call, you know, at least use the automated captions, and certainly for a larger event, you know, the accessible solution is have live captioning plus an ASL interpreter. That's how to do an inclusive event, and that will work for everyone. So just, again, it's so important for companies to consider this in their meetings, their events, their marketing. As Meryl has said, you reach more people, you will be more effective. There's a lot of benefit, and the cost is pretty low, even with the live human captioning. So it's reasonable. Larger companies certainly can afford to do this, and we need to be doing more of it. So.
Sorry, just one more question. What can technology firms do to help protect people's hearing more, to kind of stop people from like damaging their hearing by turning their volume up because they're listening, they get headphone fatigue, or yeah, they're kind of, instead of taking a rest, they're just boosting the volume a bit more. And I guess how is NBC Universal kind of addressing that?
Honestly, I think that's an interesting question, and I'm not an expert in that space. But as far as, I think, again, if the captions are present, you can turn off the volume, turn down the volume, which would presumably, you know, be healthier for your ears, and that will reduce fatigue, as Meryl said. I mean, it's challenging. We all are experiencing some of this video call fatigue to some extent. But if you're struggling to listen and there's no captions, I mean, I would think, Meryl, that just makes it worse for you. So.
And I have a caption phone. It has a really cool feature, and lets you know if the volume too loud. It doesn't make a difference with me because I can turn it all the way up. My ears are. But for some people, you know, people who have hearing, there can be software that can say, hey, your volume too loud while you're playing your music or something. Because so many people I know have damaged their hearing from going to concerts. And
yeah, and I don't know about you, Laurie, but I'm spending hours a day on calls and just at certain volumes, and it's probably damaging my hearing even more. But thank you for both for your time and joining me today. It's been very insightful, and yes, it's been great to kind of get your perspective from a content creator and like an end user perspective. So thank you very much for your time.
thank you for having me, Lucas.